Good day, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to another episode of the Political Field podcast. My name is Matthew Field, and I am, of course, the Political Field. Today, I am joined by Grace Mngadi, and this is a really special episode because she is an active member in the University of Stellenbosch's anti-gender-based violence grassroots movement. And so this episode is dedicated to exploring this movement, to unpacking what it does and how it is actively changing the culture of the University of Stellenbosch, and also where there is still work left to be done. And it's exposing the cracks in this institution and in the culture around that institution, that town, and in our entire country. So Grace, do you maybe just want to tell the audience a bit about yourself before we carry on and get into the deep discussions today?
Awesome, and thank you so much for having me. I'm very excited to be here. So a little bit about myself. I'm a second-year law student at the University of Stellenbosch, and I am the chairperson of the debating union. I'm the SRC manager for Womxn and Queer Empowerment, and basically a lot of what I do in my spare time is basically just allowing myself to assist in any social justice issues wherever I can. And most of my energy as of the past 6 months, I would say, has really been focused on gender inequalities. And that stems from my participation in the anti-gender-based violence movement.
Yeah, I just do want to emphasize how, if there were such a thing as a activism CV, that isn't really a thing, but if we were to imagine there's such a thing existing, it would be a very long and storied CV coming from the work that you're doing. You know, just from following your online presence, you are always, it seems like you have unlimited energy, and I know that's of course not true because you are human and nothing human is foreign to you, so that old Latin saying goes, but you really do walk the talk in terms of this sort of stuff. So Grace, maybe we can start by just having an overview of what the anti-GBV movement in Stellenbosch is about, how it got started, how it works. I understand that it's more of a grassroots structure, more akin to something like Occupy Wall Street than it is to something like Greenpeace in terms of there being a set structure and hierarchy and that sort of thing.
Okay, so I think from the get-go, I'm just going to start with how it came about to be, and everything will sort of follow from that. So at the end of August in 2019, there was a large, I don't know what the word is to describe the amount of emotions that were running through South Africans around the disappearance of Uyinene at UCT. And when the story came out to the fact that she had been violated in a number of gruesome ways, there was large uproar in South Africa. And gender-based violence has always been something that has been very prevalent and always engaged in. But I think the unexpectedness and the gruesomeness of this particular situation really sparked a new wave of anger that really unified South Africa against gender-based violence. And honestly, when conversations were starting in various institutions, Stellenbosch University didn't shut down. We were one of the only institutions that did not stop working. And with the seriousness of gender-based violence, we really felt enough is enough. And we were extremely upset because a lot of faculties were in the middle of their test week during that week, during the memorial and everything. And we wanted to go march to Parliament. We wanted to attend the memorial at UCT. And that just wasn't happening. And we were not getting this institutional backing that we wanted. So a group of students and some members of staff at the university came together to form the anti-gender-based violence student movement of sorts. And the objective thereof was to create awareness, to create mobilization, to create safe spaces, and to really hold the institution accountable. Because it's not the first time that we see this. A lot of institutions, and I don't think that this is exclusive to Stellenbosch, are very good at hiding things under the carpet and pushing things aside and not really addressing issues that we face. So a big thing that we did was just compile a memorandum that we gave over to the rectorate that explained all the major overarching issues that we had that concerned safety and security, managerial structures, issues with the equality units, etc., and had a compiled list of all the issues we had that needed to be investigated, because we were tired of the saying that is so well known at Stellenbosch, which is internal, external investigations, and we're doing deeper recommendations. So that was one consolidated document we gave to Rector to say, here are our issues, please sort them out. And a number of subgroups started from there, and we basically just grew. And as we saw issues, we mobilized, found different ways to combat them, broke up into branches, organized ourselves, but did all of that without creating a rigid, structured form of what an organized organization, oh, I see why it's called organization now, of what a general organization would look like, because we wanted to allow for as much development and transformation to occur internally as much as it did externally. I hope that was a clear enough overview. Do you want anything else?
I think maybe I'd just like to explore what you mean by wanting to have internal developments and transformation within this movement, and how does having it decentralized help with that?
Okay, so basically, a lot of the people who were assisting in the creation of mobilization were people who were also about to graduate, but were very much involved with Fees Must Fall when they were in their first and second year. So learning from their mistakes and their failures, we realized that if we wanted this to be something continuous, we couldn't have a leader or a head, because it's not a political party. It's something that needs to be sustainable and need to have a movement and need to be continuous, right? And what tends to happen is that if your leader or of these managerial structures and hierarchy has a particular viewpoint, it then becomes a political issue of, do we align with the way that they want to go about things or not? And that starts to draw attention to the politics of a situation instead of the situation itself. So when we don't do that, it allows for more access for allies. It allows for people to interpret what it means to be feminist in their own ways. It allows for people to associate with various organizations, and it doesn't create any burdens on anyone specifically. Because when you have a continuous thing, I know you were joking about it looking like I always have energy, but if you had to have just 4 main leaders of such a huge movement and put all that pressure on them, we're still students. It's not a viable option for the nature of this movement to make it so structured. So because everyone has different ideas on how meetings should look, how progression should look, which avenues we should focus on, we rather just give support to those various different ideas and initiatives that everyone is taking within ourselves.
That sounds like probably the way that movements should work in the future, because from my experience and my own delve into student politics, it is that, individual politicking that ends up, taking center stage in place of what the actual organization was set up to do. So I think, as young people around the country, we have a lot to learn from this movement that you're a part of. You were also chatting about the situation at the University of Stellenbosch with regards to how management of the university was handling the situation, especially in 2019. I'd also like to explore the broader cultural situation within the university and within that town. So as a student of Stellenbosch and as a member of this movement, I don't even know if I can call you a member, if membership is a concept for this grassroots movement. But how would you describe the social dynamics at Stellenbosch in 2019 and going forward? in terms of the problem at the university around gender-based violence?
So I think that the structure of the university in and of itself allows it to get away with doing quite a little bit. I think that when you're looking at how students feed into Stellenbosch University, there are a lot of subconscious biases and preconceived notions and values and norms from very closed communities that when you have those students come into Stellenbosch University and you don't have the adequate amount of training or orientation, it generates apathy, because the amount of privilege, and I'm like, I don't think it's a secret on how wealthy Stellenbosch is as a university, but the amount of privilege that exists generates this notion that people don't have to care. People think that because it doesn't affect them, they don't have to care. And even then, it's because they assume that it doesn't affect them, even though it does. Obviously, gender-based violence and a lot of other issues will always affect everyone to a certain degree. But people can opt into ignorance fairly easily because there's nothing compelling them to think otherwise. And I think that Stellenbosch University as an institution, although is trying, I think they could do a lot more. And I think that goes back to the fundamental structure, the fact that alumni have so much power over decisions that are made, the fact that we have 70 something different faculties that all specialize in something that allows you to play the blame game of, no, that's the transformation unit, then the transformation unit will send you to the equality unit, then the equality unit will send you for the Center for Students. And it's like, you guys should all be having the same function. So from the policy to the structure to the students themselves not being encouraged to have an open mind because they can really get away with not changing any mindsets that they have. I think that that is what perpetuates the stagnation of our wokeness level, if you're going to call it that.
So another, you at being a student at the University of Stellenbosch and you being cognizant of this sort of thing, I was also wondering if you could answer this question I've been having. This movement and this outrage, this national outrage that started in 2019, exposed the rape culture across the whole of South Africa. And so what I'm wanting to ask now is it worse in Stellenbosch? Is the rape culture worse? And is it different? And so what does it look like in Stellenbosch versus in Pretoria or in Cape Town Central or throughout the rest of South Africa?
So, this is really tricky, because I think that to a large extent, people still don't understand what constitutes rape culture. So in Stellenbosch, you
explore that quickly. Maybe we should explore this. What is rape culture first? And then we can
okay.
At Stellenbosch.
I like to see, well, I don't like to see it, but I personally see rape culture as everything that feeds into patriarchal, misogynistic tendencies that further limit the progression of a safe and equal community. And the reason that that definition is so vague is because there are so many different aspects. Rape culture can exist in a financial form, it can exist in a psychological form, it can exist in a physical safety form. So, and rape in and of itself does not always look to be your traditional, so to speak, definition of what rape is. It exists physically, mentally, on various different levels and stages. So rape culture as a whole is a very vague idea, purely because there are so many different facets that aid to that. So when you speak of how things look in Stellenbosch as a community in terms of rape culture, I cannot give you a straight answer, because I know of girls who will say, oh, wow, I was so drunk, I didn't mean to sleep with him, but whoops, it happened. And I'm very upset that it happened, because I wouldn't have done that if I was sober, and not realizing that that is a form of rape, because that's not something that's easily educated to them. The intersectional playing of rape culture and certain women of certain races being fetishized or being completely ignored because of their racial or class background is another thing that aids to quite a nuanced understanding of rape culture on campus. And as previously said, the alumni has a lot of weight and power over traditions, and there are a lot of extremely problematic exclusionary traditions that exist, particularly in residences, that I think harbors and breeds the toxic masculinity culture that we see on campus. So rape culture has been internalized by a lot of people on campus, and that goes regardless of the gender, be you non-binary, agender, woman, a man. You will always have some form of rape culture perpetuated. And I think that, once again, privilege that exists allows people on campus as a whole to express their biases and their cases against them and their claims and issues and anything else in terms of gender-based violence, to either be vocal about it or to be swept under the carpet, because if you put enough money on it, then it's not going to get heard. And there's so little faith in the institution as a system that the most recent statistics after my last meeting with the Equality Unit, if that is up to date, only about 12% of cases actually get reported to the institution. And I'm just assuming that's because there's a lack of trust that justice will actually get done, because transparency is not something that is easily accessible at Stellenbosch University. I can't give you a straight answer, because we ourselves don't necessarily know the extent of what rape culture looks like on an individual's level.
I think maybe that might also be an answer in of itself, because, you know, if it is so broad and so all-encompassing that you can't, you know, define it and put it in a box, that sort of tells you just how massive it is and how permeating it is, and how it kind of just envelops the whole of society at Stellenbosch and also our entire country. As South Africa, we've had a year essentially to address our crisis of femicide and gender-based violence, if we're measuring it from when the national uproar started in the way we see it now, from the murder of Uyinene at UCT. So to me, it seems that nothing really has changed in South Africa. So what I'm going to ask you now is, has anything changed at Stellenbosch since 2019?
Wow, okay. Has anything changed? Not where it matters. I think that, you know, when I gave you context in the beginning, I spoke about the fact that, you know, we handed different memorandums to different groups. So that included the rectorate with an overarching memorandum. We also marched to the police station and said to the police station on campus, look, you need to be more engaged. We marched to campus security and said, campus security, here are the ways that you have failed us. We marched to all the different residences and PSOs. And for those of you who don't know, it's similar to what Tux calls a day house, or where non-resident students form a cluster together. And that's compulsory for undergrads. So we marched to all these various places, and we also formed a committee to represent the hospitality staff and handed over a memorandum to the management in charge of the hospitality staff. And for all of that effort, the changes that were made were only in spaces where change wanted to be made. So in my SRC capacity, for example, I know that certain residences went through changing their constitution, went through completely restructuring their orientation week, and created more critical engagement sessions within their residence spaces to make it a safer, more inclusive environment so that people are open to these types of engagements. And I am so happy by the transformation, and that's because they follow the guidelines of the memorandum. However, you also get the broader policies that we were hoping for management to change, where they chose quite a quick fix out, if I can call it that. So they created 6 working groups, and they said, okay, you as a working group will be in charge of policies, you'll be in charge of values, you'll be in charge of residences, you'll be in charge of safety. And so they wanted to go deeper than just the memorandum and fully understand what they can do. And the compilation of all these investigations, from what I've seen, that report shows exactly what students have already been saying. So they've wasted a year. And even further than that, that report only got finished around 4 days ago, if I'm not mistaken. So literally after a year of formulating these task teams and working groups and investigations, it just seems as though they were buying time, and in instances where they are genuine, it's information that already existed, so it was quite unnecessary. You still have quite a lot of the same issues, but I do think that the Stellenbosch movement, the anti-gender-based violence movement, has been quite crucial in pressure. If you look at, I don't know if you know the issue of Lebo Masinga, who was a woman on our Tygerberg campus who was recently a victim of sexual assault. And the university was extremely slow to react. However, we went to the streets of Twitter, because that is a legitimate street to take. In any form of institution, publicity is the quickest way to get their attention. And so we started tarnishing the name of SU, and then boom, an email appeared. The next day, oh, this is what we're doing, we're so sorry for the delay, etc., etc. So I do think that the movement has been crucial in terms of continuously applying pressure, but in terms of major reform, the people who are in charge, like, no offense fam, are still your heterosexual, cisgender, white, old men. There's so many issues in terms of initiative and the structure that exists as a whole, and how things are done, and the policy means that we've achieved change on a very superficial level. So I don't know, but we do have a new director of student affairs, so hopefully we will see some change occurring there, but there's too many policies that allow them to get away with doing nothing.
With the recent case that you've just mentioned, and this lack of action, what is the game plan going forward for the anti-GBV movement at Stellenbosch? Are the tactics going to stay the same? Are more radical approaches going to be considered? Yeah, what is the game plan?
So our current issue that we've identified is that, you know, although I'm saying that the institution is making very shallow level approaches, that's because in the instances where they have changed, it's all been reactive and not proactive. And that's where our frustrations really are. So in doing that, our tactics as a movement, like I said, will exist to the degree that individuals of that movement wanted to. So when you speak of the movement, you need to think on 2 different levels. The movement as this one giant organism, and the movement as the individuals that create that movement. We have grown monumentally, and I think this is something that we might be discussing later on, but in the national level of the Stellenbosch anti-gender-based violence movement, we've now gotten a huge amount of momentum across the nation, and also a lot more assistance from your journalists and people like you who are having informative podcasts. So the awareness of what we're doing is allowing and aiding for our end goal of applying pressure and gaining the accountability that we're so hoping for. So I don't necessarily think that our tactics are changing. And if they do, that's great, because we don't have a set manifesto, because we want to allow for that internal progression. But I do think that our tactics are growing to a level that will have a lot more effect than it originally did when we started out.
So we've spoken about how we require change from a management perspective, but I think perhaps even more important is on the individual level, men themselves need to change their behavior. And so I'm going to refer now to some visceral and shocking images that came out from the 2019 protests, from masses of protesters going to the different male residences. This happened, I think it was first at the University of Pretoria, it happened at UCT, it happened at Stellenbosch, and we saw, rapists being dragged out of their residences and handed over to the cops by protesters. That being sort of like an outlet of extreme frustration. So what I would like to know is, has the behavior of men on campus changed? And what does, as someone speaking as a participant in this anti-GBV movement, what would you say male students should do, and what is their role in combating rape culture and toxic masculinity?
So the answer I would like to give you and the answer that I am going to give you are two very different answers. Because I would love to say that with any movement, you need your allies, and they're there and they're aware and they're here to take action and to make space and to create awareness. And I think that they're so crucial because as women, we're so tired of singing the same song that we've sung before 1956. So I think that it's very crucial that men play their role in acting as allies and calling themselves out and working towards it. And I think to some degree even women have internalized misogyny that we're undoing, and to just assist in creating a more unified sense of human dignity and mutual respect is where we need to go. And men being the predominant perpetrators is obviously the reason why we need more of them to be aware and engaged. However, Stellenbosch is still at that very, very, very first step, like not even the step, still tying the shoelaces before you start walking. In that we still have a huge amount of people who feel that asking men to get on board is an attack. So when we call people out and we say, look, you need to support equality, then it's a thing of, oh, you're making me uncomfortable. So I have the privilege to opt out and not care. So I will, because it's the easier way to go about it. We still have a lot of men who say, yes, we will do better. And then that's followed by absolutely no action. And I mean, we didn't have anyone dragging anyone out of residences. I did see that. And wow, no, that did not occur at Stellenbosch. But we did have men laughing at us when we were handing over the memorandum. In the beginning of this year, there was an extremely horrific homophobic incident that happened at a historically problematic men's residence on campus, and eggs were thrown at us when we dispersed from the march outside that residence. So I think you can't force someone to care. And all these steps that follow from having men involved start by them caring and acknowledging the fact that these atrocities do exist and that they do have a role to play, acknowledging that women are worthy of respect. For some reason, that's like a mind-blowing concept to so many people because they come from these privileged bubbles where they didn't have to care about it before, and it's become so normalized to perpetuate rape culture in so many different forms.
So it sounds like before the men of Stellenbosch can participate in this movement, they need to grow the fuck up first, essentially.
Yeah.
So maybe I actually shouldn't be calling them the men of Stellenbosch. It honestly does sound like, that town has a deep sickness that needs to be cleaned. And it's going to be painful, and it's going to be a long process, unfortunately. as with any massive social change.
I'm going to interrupt you there because I think that the difference is Stellenbosch liked to believe for a very long time that it was its own island and that the country existed and then there was Stellenbosch. But I do think that to a large extent, a lot of institutions face the same struggles as Stellenbosch. It's just that Stellenbosch is only recently going about exposing. So it seems like this drastic, oh my gosh, look, rape culture on campus, and this major shock, oh my goodness, look at that. But a number of institutions have gone through the same thing. They're just, I would say, more vocal about it, more open about it, and they have a lot more platforms where I don't think as much red tape exists around speaking out about it, which is why we need to take the more radical approach about taking to the streets of Twitter to simply get someone suspended for basically almost pushing someone off a balcony. So yeah, I think that the same issues exist, but it has to do with the institutional way of handling things thereafter, because that's where a huge fault exists.
Yeah, I think it's definitely a fallacy to say, you know, hey, Stellenbosch is this, you know, bad place. It's the Mordor of South Africa, don't go there. When in terms of gender-based violence, the whole of South Africa is Mordor. It is a country in crisis. So yeah, I definitely don't mean to say that Stellenbosch is unique in having problems. It is symptomatic of the entire country. So, you know, we've chatted about how, especially the men at this university and across all universities, you know, and across the entire country, have just not grown up and have not, you know, come up to the plate to play their part. And we've spoken about all of these institutional barriers, and we've spoken about the rape culture that is in place that is incredibly difficult to fight against, sort of like you're going up against a tidal wave. So what is it that the individual can do, the individual who does care, you know, not gendering the individual, like any Homo sapien who has a conscience? What would you recommend?
So, okay, I mean, there's so much that I think you can do, but I don't think that there's anything I'm going to say you should do. And isn't because of this is the reason I'm saying this is because we're very human and people can only do things to the degree that their circumstances allow for. And a lot of people like message me and say, hey, Grace, so I know you're a part of the movement. How can I get involved with the movement? What can we do? And the answer to that is we are a movement. Move. If you're moving forward in any shape or form, being educating yourself, educating other people, if you're that person who posts 1 million different informational resources on their status, do it. If you're the person who is from an extremely conservative community back home and just getting your parents to not use homophobic language is the biggest victory you have ever thought possible, do it. If you can organize protests and you're great at administrative skills, because wow, that protest registry form takes so long. I did not realize how much admin goes behind organizing a protest, but thank the Lord for Tsecho. But anyway, so if you want to be a marshal at a protest and you know first aid, go for it. So there are so many different things that aid to a movement, and be that through education, mobilization, gathering support, just show up. When someone goes through the effort of creating a resource pack, of educating themselves, of organizing a protest, literally just show up. Being a member of a movement doesn't necessarily mean that everyone has to be a leader at the forefront, which I think is a huge misconception that so many movements have, that if you're not the forefront leader of that, then you're basically wasting your time. And I think that a movement needs to be more than that. There are leaders, there are followers, there are doers, there are listeners, there are speakers, and we need to accept the fact that those roles will always change. And there are times where I am out in the streets leading marches, and there are times where I'm just crying in my bed watching Netflix because I'm so overwhelmed by the world. And that's okay. Just make sure that what you're watching on Netflix is woke material and not problematic, and that's okay. So yeah, I suppose what the individual can do is just keep moving and move forward in your individual space, so that that creates the ripple effect of others around you starting to follow suit in that. That would look like, for example, someone from a very conservative community just reading a book and saying, wow, my eyes are open, and calling out locker room banter, for example. It doesn't necessarily mean that you completely change society as a whole, but you just broke the chain of what leads to rape in the steps of rape culture, in this huge system of rape culture and all the different forms that exist. So anything that you do is doing something, so the individual must do. That sounded like the Lorax in some way, but yes.
You know, every once in a while, people say really, really quotable lines that, you know, just need to be put on, you know, posters in offices. And you said one of them there. You said, we are a movement, move. And that is honestly one of the most powerful, catchy, impactful things that I've heard in a really long time. And, you know, we've only just scratched the surface of this movement and of this problem that the University of Stellenbosch is facing and that this country is facing. And, you know, I don't think there's any appropriate time to end off a conversation on this. I don't think it should end until every single woman in this country and throughout the world is liberated and rape culture is destroyed. Unfortunately, bandwidth is a thing, data is a thing, your retention is a thing, so we do need to end somewhere. We can't talk into infinity. So I think maybe this would be a good opportunity to wrap up, because from my perspective as a host, what I would want my viewers to go away with is that quote that you said, we are a movement, so move. You know, if you can't lead, then just do something. If you can't go marching in the streets, if you feel small, you can always just do something. And I think that's a good message to end on. So thank you so much, Grace, for coming on the podcast. It has been an incredible conversation to have. You know, obviously I'm a guy. Because of the nature of my lived experience, I'm going to be ignorant of a lot of the stuff that comes out of conversations like these. So thank you for being willing to educate me and being willing to educate my audience. Yeah.
Thank you so much for having me and being willing to engage. That's always the first step, being willing to engage and willing to listen and learn and reach out. And it's really refreshing to have someone care within all their privileged capacity. So thank you so much for having me, and thank you so much for sharing the message of what we're about.
Yeah, in this day and age, ignorance truly is a choice.